Well, something we don't generally speak too much about in unity is prophecy. I don't have an intention to speak about biblical prophecy today, but as a capacity in consciousness that each of us have. Commonly, we may think of prophecy as being something that someone demonstrated a long time ago and in a land far, far away. But it's an activity of mind. It's an activity of consciousness that I would like to address this morning, because it is not something that is alien to us. In fact, I would like to present some ideas that you and I are about this all the time. To profess that which we desire. My Uncle Milton, from years and years ago, back in the 1950s, was involved in a car accident that did something to his brain, that stimulated an area of his consciousness that hadn't been stimulated before. And he used to talk about that when he would lay down and rest, that he would leave. He would leave his physical experience and travel into places that were so beautiful and so filled with the celestial music. He called it the music of the spheres. And that he would encounter beings there, angels. He was not a religious man. But he came back to his physical form that sometimes was burdened with great pain and suffering because of that accident. And he would weep, not only for the beauty of what he had experienced, but then facing the fact that he had to endure more time in the physical body. You and I are blessed to have a physical experience. But you and I are also continually endeavoring to expand consciousness in our own way. And I remember the stories from my mother and aunts about Uncle Milton. One evening, they were sitting around the dinner table. This was back before I was even born. My grandmother would say, "You know, I just wonder how I'm going to leave this world." And we all have these thoughts in common. You know, how long will we live? What will it be like when we die? Make our transition? And my Uncle Milton said, "Oh, I know exactly when you're going to make your transition. I've seen it. You're sitting in your recliner chair underneath your picture of Jesus on the wall. And that was 30 years before it happened. And it happened exactly as he said." So it made me wonder about this thing called life, about the nature of space and time. So that if a man could be sitting in quietness and perceive something that was going to happen 30 years in the future, it makes me wonder about whether or not this life is already on some level predetermined. You know, Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity Movement, said that the physical world is the evidence of a spent force. Evidence of a spent force. So that you and I are engaged with this physical world, and there are voices and books and different things that tell us, well, it's not predetermined at all. It's a co-creative process that we are moving and that there are no guarantees and all of that. And yet I wonder, on a certain level that is outside of the physical, whether or not that it's already done. It's already happened. And that the physical world that we are in this very moment is unfolding according to what we say is a divine plan. A plan that has already been put into place. A plan for our fruition of who and what it is that we already are. Always have been. And always will be. To me, there was some peace in that. And I had my own experience. I've had a few around this type of space-time evidence. I remember back in 1975, I was in boot camp in the United States Coast Guard in the Bay Area. And I was charged to, at the evening before lights out, that I was charged to do a head count of all of the people in my company, making sure that none of them had run off. And so I did that. And I remember coming into a small office in the barracks, and I was going to log it in and make a report. And all of a sudden, something shifted in my consciousness, and I said, oh my God, I have already done this. And I wasn't talking about the night before. What shifted in my consciousness was, I have already done this very thing on another level. And we can call that déjà vu or whatever. But it was evidence of some form of prophecy, perhaps reverse prophecy. I don't know how to exactly explain déjà vu. You and I work with spiritual principle all the time. We have caught on to this idea that the physical world is an effect. That when we work with the divine ideas of mind, that we're working with cause. And that's why I'm saying that we are all working with prophecy on a certain level, because when we're working with divine ideas, we're working with life on the level of cause, and we're planting new seeds in consciousness, and that the universe is listening. It is malleable, it is receptive and open to mind. And that when we sit within the silence, like we did just moments ago, we are planting seeds in consciousness for a greater life, and that is a version or an expression of prophecy, because we are professing that which is the actual truth as we know it. And we are letting go of that which is not true, called denial within the unity movement, denying that appearances and everything that we think is true has any power over us whatsoever. We affirm the truth of being, and that the universe is listening. And as we affirm truth, as we profess it, then the universe, God, Creator, listens. And that we are co-creating. And we aren't in charge. We aren't in charge of our lives, but what we are in charge of are our choices. through the use of the will, the personal will, to co-create with life. If we think that we're in charge of life, that can be kind of a neurotic place to be. But we are in charge of our choices, of how we're going to respond to life. That you and I are sitting in this room or being in this room, and we have charge of our choice, even in the listening of what I'm saying right now. You can choose to accept or deny it, and you have that divine right to do that very thing. So my uncle was not someone special. He was just a man that had an awakening because of an accident. Well, it really wasn't an accident at all. In the deeper teachings of New Thought, there is not an atom out of place. There is no accidents in God. That was all as a result of divine timing. Just as you being here in this very moment is a result of divine timing, and it is an action of your choice to be here. So using our will to give thanks for a certain outcome, to visualize it, to claim it, to see it, is a form of prophecy, because we are professing what it is that is in our hearts to be manifested. And I am so blessed in this work over almost 20 years now of being in ministry, of being with so many people privately and otherwise, that have gone through the valley of the shadow of death. But they profess a greater truth. They profess a greater good. And many times it is manifested in a very quick way. And if we are still dealing with the results of the past, there must be learning there for us to have. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity Movement, said that thought is very powerful, that thoughts are things. And so it is important, relatively, in this co-creative process that we pay attention to our thoughts. And there was this publication by the Unity Movement. It is part of the Lenten season, which we are in. In Unity, we don't adhere strictly to anything that is theological. But Lent is a period of fasting and feasting. And I wanted to share with you something from the National Science Foundation that was published in 2005. The average person has 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. Of those, 95% are exactly the same repetitive thoughts as the day before. Can you relate to that? The vast majority, or 80% of them, are negative. That's a lot of negative thoughts, and that's a lot of worrying. When we worry, we conjure up scenes in our minds of undesirable outcomes for ourselves, our loved ones, acquaintances, strangers, the country, even the planet. But as divine beings, one of our innate qualities is imagination. The power to visualize, to envision, conceptualize, and to think outside the box. When we worry, we are misusing our power of imagination. And during this season of Lent, let us take a break from such misuse. Let us use our power of imagination from a place of higher consciousness. Let us visualize only the best outcomes, centered in peace, joy, and love for all people. So we are the shepherds of our thoughts, and metaphysically, when we think of the idea of a shepherd and it's his or her sheep, we certainly don't like to be thought of as sheep, do we? But the sheep are our thoughts that sometimes wander away from the shepherd, and they get stuck in the thicket. And it is ours to go and retrieve them and to get them unstuck so that we can move forward in our lives. So we are prophets of our own lives. I came across this statement the other day. A prophet of God is someone willing to see the presence of God within someone else. A prophet of God is someone willing to see the presence of God within someone else. To see it. About 2-3 nights ago, I was watching a movie that most of you in this room, I think, have probably seen. The movie Avatar. It came out about 8 years ago. There's a new one coming out in, I think, next year. But one of the most profound scenes in that film is when the daughter of the tribal chief, when she meets him, she says, "I see you. I see you." And we can practice that with each other. To practice not only to visually see people, but to practice being a prophet for them. To say, "I see you. I see God in you." It's very much like in the East when people say namaste. I see the presence of God in you. Someone years ago said to me, "I behold the Christ in you because I can't stand the rest." And I said, "Well, thank you for sharing." That was in my first church in the Unity movement way back in 2001, 2002. And in that church, I facilitated a class called 4T. 4T is a prosperity class, and the T's are time, treasure, tithing, and talent. And it's a way of participating in the flow of life through seeing life in a new way. Giving really what it is that you desire. And I remember one night we were working with the idea of imagination. And looking at that word, somehow it popped out to me. I-MAGI. A magi is described as a priest or seer or a developed person, a man or woman who sees beyond the appearances. Metaphysically, it is described as spiritual maturity. And I was thinking about magi. When we think about magi, basically we're always often thinking about the three wise men in the biblical story at Christmas time. But this story is a universal that can be applied here in springtime. Because the Magi are or is that place within us that is spiritually mature enough to move into the cave of the heart, the manger, to perceive the divine innocence that is continually being born. It is that place in us that is able to be still enough, to be spiritually mature enough. And by the way, the definition of evil is unripe fruit. In Aramaic, unripe fruit. So, being ripe, being ready, being wholly guided by the star, which is the spiritual light. These are all symbols. This biblical story, this nice little story that we give our attention to at Christmas time, is a powerful metaphor of symbolism that is guiding us. The three magi is that place in consciousness that is spiritually mature and willing to follow the light to a place of new birth, of the innocence within one's own heart center. And we don't have the spiritual, or until we have the spiritual maturity to center ourselves and to be still, we won't be able to enter into that inner place, that manger of the heart, in order to behold the divine innocence that is there, being born within the presence of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Mary and Joseph are these examples of the maturity of self. And so this work that we are involved in, this spiritual work, I call it work, endeavor, discipline, rigor, whatever it is that you would like to name this process, is basically giving our attention, our imagination as magi, because everyone in this room has this consciousness within you. You are, your heart center, your being is the magi of your life. And it is the magi of my life. So being in that consciousness of the magi, the seer, the priest or priestess of your own being, then you can see your own innocence. You can see the divine birth that is continually being born every day, every moment of your life. And this past week sometimes I get up, as I have stated here before, very early at night, middle of the night. So late, it's early. But I was considering everything that's happening in my own personal experience. You know, the releasing of my work here, the considerations and so forth of my own mother that I just had placed in a new assisted living place, and the work before us, and all of these seeming uncertainties of that whole transitional process of moving from one point to another. And I know that you can all relate. You have these transitions in your life. And what I came to at 2 a.m. was that I can't do this alone. I just can't. And so what I started to practice was to move into the center of the core of being, my own heart, my own manger. I started to call upon the Magi of my own being, the priest, the seer, the mature spiritual being that I am in truth. And I started to say, come now, come into consciousness. I don't like these thoughts, these wayward sheep of mind. And within a very brief time, the energy started to shift, and I started to feel strong, grounded, peaceful, full of hope, full of knowing that God was with me at every step. And this is what it is. It's so available to each one of us in your life. As you feel sometimes weak or vulnerable, or you don't know where to go next, what is so important is to turn to that place, to identify ourselves as the Magi, and to imagine life as a co-creator with God. To know that though we walk through the valley of the shadow, God is with us every step of the way, always. So we come here on Sundays not only to listen to the great music that is presented and see our friends, but to have a divine remembrance of what is really happening, who we actually are, to remember the truth of our being. I'll end today with something from the Course in Miracles. Course in Miracles is a beautiful complement to the Unity teachings. And it says that we are wholly innocent. We are that actual being that is being born every day. And we get stuck in this identity of being less than or not good enough. And it all has to we just need to breathe and release that. We are the prophets of our own lives. I would just invite you to always remember that. Let us remember our actual identity. Just take a moment and be with your own being and just feel into your own innocence. That you're perfect just the way you are. You don't have to achieve anything more. It's just about remembering, discovering, accepting, allowing. Thank you very much.